Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
agreeing to do this.
Mhm.
As you may know, you're my second guest. So I'm trying. My goal here is to kind of create a community where people can recognize that we can heal from our trauma and actually be very vibrant from it. I've been following you for quite a while on your page, and it's kind of exciting to see what I refer to as that post-traumatic growth of specifically your group that you do for other survivors. So basically, you're taking your story, you've empowered yourself, you have recovered, and now you're kind of giving the gift back. So if you could tell us a little bit about your story and how you got here today, and we'll
Mhm.
go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just want to give a shout out to all of my ex-Mormons that showed up. I gotta tell you, like, it's been weird joining TikTok because, I mean, I started joining a support group for conversion therapy survivors, and that's been immensely healing. And then I join TikTok and I'm like, oh, I like this ex-Mormon. I like this ex. Oh my gosh, there's like a whole community. And it's been so crazy to find like so many overlaps between the conversations that I have with other conversion therapy survivors, and they're like so similar to everyone else who has religious trauma, whether they're queer, straight, or along the spectrum. So it's been wonderful to be involved in the ex Mormon community on TikTok.
That's great.
Um,
And I
I
think I
forgot.
shared with you my ex-wife was Mormon. She was raised Mormon.
Oh, I do not remember that.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. So it although she left the church, but her
Mhm.
family was Mormon, so you could
Yeah.
imagine they're embracing me. Now we were married for 26 years, so I only came out about 4 years ago. So I was married for 26 years. I have four or two adult children. But so of course when I came out, it was like, oh, even like really now,
Yeah.
no wonder he was such a, whatever.
Oh wow.
But so I know quite a
Yeah.
bit of
Mm.
about the Mormon Church. I actually went to go see the
Okay.
temple in Orlando before it was
Okay.
not sacrificed. What's the word? Say no, when it's blessed,
Consecrated.
consecrated. Thank you. Um, sorry for my bad word choice.
No, that's wonderful. That's
Now
wonderful.
I'm going to
No,
turn
it's
red.
it's really good to like talk about this because I was actually talking with my group yesterday about how fascinating it is that when we are fresh out of conversion therapy, we have this huge urge, just don't think about it because it hurts too much. Right. And so it's fascinating how much you can forget. And so when I've been joining lives or just watching them or videos on ex Mormon TikTok, it's fascinating how many memories come up and be like, oh my gosh, I had that experience too. And then a flood of other memories come over. So it's I love you not knowing the word because sometimes I don't either, and then someone will say it and I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's right, that's what we used to say. So yeah,
So tell us a little
um,
bit about your story.
yeah. So I am a lifelong Mormon, born and raised in Provo, Utah, one of the
The
Mormony
motherland,
Mormon
yes.
places. Yes. It's interesting. Whenever I've looked back, I forget what the psychology term is in therapy when you're looking at someone's vignette of all of the impacts of their life. But to kind of frame that, uh, when I looked up the 1980s population of Mormons and race too, because for me, I think the more I look at it, race actually is part of my conversion therapy story. Apparently, in Utah, specifically Provo and Orem area, it was about 80% white and 80% Mormon, and that's a conservative number. So it
Mm.
was probably more like 90%. And so for me, here I was growing up, this very brown kid. Because like I think being in Seattle makes it so like I never see the sun. Suddenly I can pass for white, which is a weird thing for me because I did not have that experience in Utah whatsoever. But
Really?
I was always able to tell that I was different, and the kids definitely made sure that I knew that. And so for me, part of the reason why I think my Mormonism and my race kind of was a preparatory situation for me to eventually go into conversion therapy is because I don't know if you ever heard this part of Mormonism, but it used to be taught until about the 90s that if you were righteous enough and prayed hard enough, you could become Caucasian. Okay, so you know this. Okay.
Crazy,
It's
crazy,
what's
crazy.
sad.
Yeah.
I remember one of the memories that I unlocked is I remembered being this like 6-year-old singing this song called Book of Mormon Stories. And it's super racist because you do on the piano, they make it sound like Indian drums, like Native American drums. And
Mm.
you're all doing these like hand signs, like you have like feathers in your cap type of thing, and doing these very awful tropes. And the words of the song in Book of Mormon Stories says that if you're righteous, you get to stay in this blessed land, which is called America. And if you're not righteous, God will kick you out.
Mm.
And so I remember being around all these white kids and being afraid that if I wasn't righteous, God was going to deport me back to, well, to a place I'd never been because my biological father is Mexican.
Oh,
And I never met him. I never knew him. And so here I was, a citizen of the United States because my mother's Puerto Rican, but I was of mix and of mixed status through my parents. And so here I was thinking like, what's going on here? And then later having people tell me, well, whether you like it or not, this is what's taught. So lean into the fact that you need to become more righteous and become white. And so I think the groundwork that Mormonism laid for me was here's something that's clearly not really changeable, but look, you can avoid the sun, your shade can change, right? And so it was kind of this idea of like, well, you can go from super dark to like maybe just milk chocolate, right? See, you can change. And if you're more righteous, then you would be whiter than you would be otherwise. So it kind of laid this foundation of, see, there might be things to you that are unchangeable, but not so much. And so that
wow.
became part of my psyche of hating my identities, every single which one of
From the
them,
big get-go,
100%.
before you
So,
even understood the concept of sexuality.
and race too, because I remember being confused. I'm like, white people aren't white. My mom is more white than them. They're like peach, like, and I didn't understand it. And so for me, it was very confusing, but I quickly learned through the bullying that not only was Mexican bad, brown was bad, gay was bad, like all of these things I needed to hate about myself and minimize in every way, shape, or form.
Mm.
And so here I was, I had my first boyfriend at 11. And so, but I was telling myself, now I'm straight. Like I would have a girlfriend if the girl would do this with me, type of thing. So I was like totally telling myself that I was straight. Meanwhile, I have a boyfriend on the weekends. And
Ah,
so, yeah, it's just when everyone is telling you this is the only way that life is, everyone says there's four lights, but you see five, you find some way to tell yourself there's only four, right?
mhm.
The beauty of psychology and the ability of humans to adapt to their psychological and environmental, physical environments. So,
Even to the harm of themselves.
100%, because you have to figure out how to survive and thrive in your environment. And so for me, because my father was never in my life, when I got to the age of 12, that's a very important part in a young cisgender male's life for a Mormon, because that's when a boy gets the priesthood, and
Right.
that's you're told this is like the power to have angels minister, the power to like do all of these miraculous things. And so it was a very serious thing where here I was having a boyfriend on the weekend and then going to church and now being told I have God's power and I'm not really doing godly things, And so I came to this crossroads where it was kind of like splitting my psyche, where I had to realize like, here's this boyfriend that I have that's okay, but he doesn't, 6 days out of the week, my boyfriend isn't with me, but God is, right? And so I had this void of a heavenly father and who was supposedly always there and would comfort me when my boyfriend wasn't. And
Mm.
so I had to realize I need to choose. And I don't know what made me choose. Maybe it was some lecture on you can't serve two masters, but I eventually decided I have to reject this. And so from there, I thought I had given up the gay lifestyle because I thought I was straight, just living gay, right? Because that was the only option that I had. And so here I was thinking, I'm straight, and I left that behind me. Whatever, my sins are in the past. And then I remember I was talking, I think with you or someone else, and they're like, "Well, when did you first know that you were gay?" And I think the problem with environments like the one that I was in, you have glimpses of it and you have memories of it, but because your environment doesn't allow you to remember, you repress it. And only when you're in that same context can the memories come out. And
Mhm.
I have had a memory resurface of being 15, knowing that I was madly in love with my best friend. Like, I was working, I was at a grocery store putting bags in this thing and earning my own pay. And for some reason, I just could not stop fantasizing about my life with my best friend. How, oh, of course we'll have wives and kids, but my best friend and I, like, I was just so fantasizing about our life together, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. And I would have inappropriate dreams at night, which would cause me to pray profusely.
Mm.
And I remember being like, why am I having thoughts like this, but not for a girl? And then it smacked me like, because your bullies are right, because you're gay. And I had this beautiful realization of like, this explains everything. you know, like, oh my God, of course. Rather than me having sins and falling into the lifestyle, me went to that because that was natural to me rather than the other way around. But right before I was about to go home from that shift, I I realized that I was going to have to tell my parents, and something inside me told me that I mean, my mom is a Puerto Ricana from New Jersey. So if a guy with two guns versus my mom will win. I don't care what she has. She will
She's a
take a bottle.
badass.
She will. Yeah, my money's on my mother. So I was, to be honest, deathly afraid of how my mom would react. And I was like, if I even survive telling my mother, I very likely will be homeless. And the environment makes you do what you have to do. And so I found some way to convince myself, like, oh, but I remember feeling the spirit, feeling these great feelings when I was in church. And so, of course, I know it's true. And if Joseph Smith was a prophet, then Jesus must exist, even though it doesn't make any sense to me. And then it all wrapped up in a cute little bow. And then from then on, I realized I need to serve a mission. And the rest was history until I actually went on my mission. So that's what kind of created my psyche at the time.
Meaning you pushed all of those feelings into a box and repress, repress, repress. Try to mask as much masculinity as you possibly could. And so
100%.
men go on missions at 19, correct?
Hmm. Well,
And so
now they can go at 18, but at the time, yeah.
and so that's what you did is you went on a mission.
It
And
was, ugh, it was my life's dream. Like, as soon as I chose the church over my boyfriend, and then again when I realized I'm gay and this cannot be my thing, again devoted myself to the church. I dreamed of being a missionary every single day. I worked side jobs. I saved my money. I memorized scripture. If there was a Mormon example of a Mormon, I decided to be even more Mormon than that Mormon, right? Like,
because what people
oh,
probably don't know is that you actually pay for your own mission trip, right? The church does not pay
100%.
for that. That's all on you and your family.
Of course. What a waste.
And
But
it's
I
two
mean,
years. It's a 2 year journey. So I don't know how much money did you save up?
I don't know because I wasn't very fiscally responsible and my parents managed everything. But I
You
know it
handed
wasn't
over to
cheap.
them, yeah.
It was
It
not
was not
cheap.
cheap, yes.
I can tell you that. But
You did your
literally, it
mission
was
work.
everything.
Where did you go?
I went to Houston, Texas.
Oh,
Yeah,
so you stayed in the US.
I did, which I was very upset about because I studied German, I studied American Sign Language, I studied Spanish. Like, I was like, send me somewhere else, but no.
I want to be a world traveler. Like, here's my
Uh-huh.
my ticket. Yes. Even
Hmm.
that was diminished.
Yeah. But I mean, I thought the prophet knew my journey. So, of course, you have to do
Ah,
what he
right.
does. Yeah, because
I
as you
forget
probably
that as a
know.
non-Mormon, I forget that,
Hmm.
right? All of those messages, like, okay, this is meant to be. This is what the prophet wants me to do. Yeah, right.
Hmm. Because we literally believe the prophet talks with Jesus in a special room and like gets advice, on like, this is what I want for my church. And so to go against your prophets and apostles is literally telling Jesus no. So
Mm.
like, you don't say no. When the church says jump, I said how high and should I sing while I do it? Like, that was me. And so this was like my life ambition. And what was frustrating is that for me, the way to deal with my attractions was exactly what the musical. I hope you're familiar with the musical,
Of
right?
course.
Like,
So I've seen it
find the
several
box
times.
that's
Yeah.
gay and crush it, you know? So, because that was me on my mission, and even before, I dealt with my gay attractions by working harder, by
Hmm.
praying harder, by memorizing more scriptures. I loved knocking on doors. Every other missionary I knew, besides except for my trainer, hated knocking on doors. I loved it because I thought it was an opportunity to like let my spirit prove to them that like I'm called of God and they're going to join the church and I'm going to baptize thousands. Like I loved that opportunity. But about 6 months in to my mission, the prophet made a big announcement. He said, if you have past sins, you may not be worthy to be here no matter how hard you've tried. If you have certain past sins, you can't be here anymore. So I talked to my mission president and I was like, look, this is behind me, but I need you to know I had a boyfriend at the age of 11 and 12, da, 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 right? And what was so beautiful to me is that he's like, wait, so you are dealing every single day, all day, with gay attractions, but you are more righteous and more chaste than half of the missionaries here. Well, great. Like he applauded me. He
Right.
he encouraged me. He's like, "Wow, I am so glad you're here because of that." And so a year and a half in, when I had another elder who we called Trunky, where he just cannot wait to take his trunk and go home, type of thing, he didn't want to work at all, and so my attractions were suddenly a lot harder to deal with because I couldn't work. And so I talked to my new mission president, and I was sent home 2 days later. So
Wow.
everything fell apart like in 2 days. And then I suddenly had to realize this thing that I thought was behind me, I now have to face. And so I did what the church said to do, which is conversion therapy.
And so in your particular case, conversion therapy was specifically for Mormons? So it was a
Mm-hmm.
religious-based conversion therapy program? Because I know there are other ones. I don't know if you know in
Yeah.
Florida, conversion therapy for a while was deemed to be illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And two people from Boca, which is like right down the street from me, said it was a freedom of speech issue, and it is still okay in the state of Florida to do conversion therapy, which
Yeah.
is, given all the data, it is so shocking to me.
Correct.
And that happened about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that ruling happened. It's just
I'm not
extraordinary.
I'm not surprised because it's always like a cat and mouse chase of like at Brigham Young University. I'm not sure if you knew what they did there. They were huge proponents of electroshock therapy.
No,
Um,
I was not aware of that. I know that
yeah,
occurred in the 50s. I didn't realize that that was
yeah. hmm
still
I
happening.
was I was very fortunate. I was warned about electroshock therapy. One of my other conversion therapy survivors at the time, when we were in it, um, because it wasn't working, because obviously it doesn't work. So I kept trying, it wasn't working. And so I was flustered, and I was talking with one of my friends, one of my brothers who was also trying to change. And he's like, I know it's hard, but don't do that. Don't do electroshock therapy. It messed him up. It didn't make him more straight, it just made him more messed up, right? And so I at least was warned about that, but it still happened. And I started conversion therapy in 2003 because that's when they sent me home. And I went to LDS services, Latter Day Saint uh, therapy services, and when it first started, it was family therapy because they told me that being gay is a family mental illness. And so my mom was there, my new stepdad was there, and I fit the mold to the T. The absentee father,
Absent
because my
father.
dad, yeah, absent father, yup, check. And then my dad, my stepdad, is an Idaho farmer. So he's like, "Oh, emotions, what are those? Like, I love you, son." And that was it, like, so, and then my mom, just do what she says and no one gets hurt, you know? So, so overbearing mother, absent father, check, check. This is why he's gay, right? But then the problem is I, conversion therapy was just me getting yelled at all session. My dad maybe saying a word, and then my mom just saying he never listens. And then clearly each week, still gay. So
Mm.
that didn't
And,
help.
and so how long were you actually in conversion therapy before you? Well, I wanted you to talk a little bit about because I've seen on your videos about that the angst between being suicidal and so I don't know if you've ever seen the video by Gabor Mate where he talks about authenticity versus belonging,
Oh, I
and
think
that
you mentioned it in one of your videos, and I was like, this is amazing. And I
it,
looked
it,
it up a little bit.
it's very profound because basically what he talks about is that there are two primitive needs to be who we are, right? Like your race. I mean, and it's interesting some of the variables that you're talking about and how that showed up within your culture, right? Very different depending on where you are, what your community is about, what your religion is. So there's that authenticity and then the need to be part of the community and
Right.
that when they are against each other, his that's his whole theory as to why people become addicts is they have to
Mm,
give up their authenticity in order to belong, and because of the damage of giving up our authenticity we have to numb ourselves with compulsive behaviors, and that
mm-hmm.
really is his whole, and that's why, so he's not quite a 12 stepper because he really looks at it more from the trauma lens as it
Yes.
relates to the function of the compulsive behavior.
And what I think is fascinating about what you just mentioned is because I think for years I've recognized that the way that I treated my church was as an addiction because it was what soothed me. It's what gave me belonging. It's what gave me community. I was literally addicted to Mormonism. And since Mormonism said you have to be straight, and I mean, Brigham Young, the second prophet of the church, said, if you're not married by 25, you're a menace to society, right? So,
Wow.
like, so there were all these little sayings of all the time that like if you don't leave your mission and immediately get married, what are you doing? Like you're basically a pariah to everyone everywhere. And so it really turned up the dial of like, not only do I have to become straight now, I have to become straight really soon because I have to
Right.
get married. I have to have 12 kids. I have to, I have to send them off all on missions. All of my life has to start now. But there's this pesky little problem of me being gay.
Right. And not
And
attractive.
and what you also mentioned is like this idea of authenticity, which I find fascinating because every single week they are telling you the prescribed way to be a Mormon male. You're supposed to go up there, be very firm, be very firm, be very like as matter of fact as it is, you're the leader of the home. But as soon as you talk about Jesus, you become emotional. You are supposed to cry on cue. You
Uh,
say certain sayings, and you become this very emotionally sensitive person. And so it was very confusing for me because when I left family services, my mom, thank goodness, allowed me to have my own therapist. And it was so weird what he was saying because he called me transgender. And he said that because I was too effeminate, I had more effeminate roles. I need to be more masculine, do this, do this, do this. And it was all very stereotypical straight. But then I was like, but if you want me to do all these stereotypically straight things, which is toxic masculinity, why, when I go to a church, I see this very Jesus, kumbaya, lovey dovey version
don't
of
be logical.
masculinity?
Don't be
And
logical.
I had to be. I mean, the messages they were telling me like,
Yeah.
and clearly nothing was working, so I was constantly like, these don't make sense, this doesn't make sense, but I have to ask how high because I'm trying to make this work. And just their instructions never made sense, so I would like wear flannel, I'd start wearing I'd start listening to country music, I'd be like lowering my voice whenever I remember to lower my voice. Don't get too excited because that, oh my god, that comes out, and he said I
So
can't
where
ballroom dance.
so where was the jump where you decided, okay, I'm leaving the church, I'm going to be me. I know what I'm going to lose, right? I mean, it's a major ask to be authentic. So where can you describe that moment for us?
Yeah, I think honestly it just wore me down. So about 6 months before I left conversion therapy, I decided to go to Brigham Young University. And my friends described that they never knew who they were talking to, the straight Sam or the gay Sam.
Mm.
Looking back, I recognize that it was very obviously dissociative identity disorder. Constant headaches. I was miserable all the time. And I eventually found a support group for people like me. They called it Evergreen. Um, It was a group of gay men who were supported by the LDS Church, but they treated us like sex addicts, and so we would go every week. You know, how many times were you attracted to men last week? Oh, every day, every hour. You know, just we try to do 12 steps type of thing with each other. But it was the first time I found people like me. And it was so frustrating because suddenly like my walls could come down and I'd find these men who were so devout like me. We wouldn't go to church and hear these men who had earned their heterosexuality apparently, because here we were trying to earn the miracle of heterosexuality. They just got it, right? And so here they were, not listening to the church, not listening to the rules, doing very horrible things, and yet here we were more devout than them and just failing miserably. And I saw how beautiful these men were, and I saw myself in them. And I started hearing stories from men who were much, much older, who had done what the church had said. They had gone into mixed orientation marriages, they had kids, but they would mess up every year. They would break the law of chastity. They were on multiple medications, multiple suicide attempts. They'd be lying all the time. I just saw my future in these men of what's going to happen, because I saw that no matter what I did, I was always going to have to lie, because that's what it was. And I had it, and I begged for help, and I was like, I need the most expert of experts here. This is, I'm like, I'm getting to the point where it's either go or um, I didn't see any other options, really. And so I found this therapist who supposedly was the best. Um, and he was the first one that didn't treat me like an addict
Hmm.
and taught me about psychology. Because as a Mormon, I was very much into the idea that the subconscious doesn't exist, because that takes away our free agency, which is a very foundational part of Mormonism.
Hmm.
You have free agency, and that if outside influences are making you do things, it's because you're not strong enough and you need to pray harder. And so the idea of subconscious felt like heresy to me. But this guy, Jeff Robinson, was a bishop, so someone who was in charge of a congregation. He might have even been a stake president, which is like a bishop of a bishop. Um, and so here he was, a man who did his doctoral dissertation on men who change. Um, and he didn't label me as an addict, because he knew that we weren't choosing this. He knew we were devout. He knew we were trying really hard. But to him, you can't be born this way, because that's against God's plan for his children. So he created a theory that it's like Pavlovian training. And I had never heard of this before. I was like, what are you talking about?
I
And he's
haven't
like,
either.
oh,
Yeah.
there's this guy, you know, he like rings a bell and then the dogs get fed. And then he taught me about how he can salivate, how the dogs would salivate with the ring of
But
a
how does
bell.
that relate to orientation? I've
What
never heard the correlation between the two.
he and it's disgusting, because his whole theory is on his website, and when you read it, it's like, this is gross, because I could actually see how someone could like be really informed with psychology, but like totally bastardize it. And so what he believes is that the Pavlovian training comes from being isolated from men. And so what seems different from you as you're growing into puberty is the other men rather than the women. And so your thoughts are preoccupied with becoming a man. And so rather than
Um,
becoming preoccupied with what's opposite of you, you're preoccupied with this achievement that you'll never be able to achieve, and then that becomes part of your arousal, because that part of your body is developing. And then because you're continually fantasizing about them, you teach yourself how to fantasize about them, and
right,
then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger,
right, right.
which frustrated me, because I was like, but I've already left homosexuality twice, you know, like I was in it as a 13-year-old, and then, you know, and I chose the church. So why is it still here?
Right.
And so for several times I thought, oh,
Oh, it actually makes me think of two different things that I would really be interested to hear his perspective on. I don't know if you've seen the research, but the only predictor of being gay is the number of older male siblings you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. The
Right. So,
younger.
right,
Yeah.
that's almost anti to what he's talking about, right? Because now you're
Yes.
surrounded by men. So I
Yes.
would be curious as to how he makes that fit. The other story that it makes me think, as far as how we put square pegs in circle holes, is I
Yep.
don't know if you know the story of Sigmund Freud and his whole theory on penis envy, but he was
Yes.
treating one of his colleagues' daughters. So I'll share it for
Mm-hmm.
the people who are listening. He was treating one of his colleagues' daughters, and she talked about how she was being molested by her father, which was his colleague. And he's like, right, this is the height of
No
the
way.
Victorian age. No way this could be happening. Clearly, she is fantasizing. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was where he came up with the whole theory of penis envy, is that women desire their father's penis. That's why they fantasize about this. And
Mm-hmm.
again, so he created, right, this is the father of psychology, right? So he creates a whole theory base to justify what was the sexualization of this client.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course we also have the hysteria and the
Yes.
response to, right, again, during the historic or during the Victorian age, that because sex was such a bad thing to talk about, right? Women wore clothes all the way down to their wrist, down to their, even when they went to the beach, they were completely covered from neck down. And so the treatment of hysteria was doctors providing an organ, because the theory was is the uterus was floating around the body
Yeah.
and it would create paralysis or blindness. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you stimulated the woman and gave her an orgasm, the uterus would come back to its appropriate place and then free it up. Of course, if you think of it from an unconscious perspective, right, if we're unshaming sexuality, right, because we're the doctor, and this is really the origins of the vibrator, you probably are aware of this, right, because the
I didn't
doctors
know that.
yeah, the doctors got so tired of manually stimulating the women that they created a device so that they didn't have to do the work, right? And the women were lining up for doctor's appointments. Like, I need a weekly appointment because I
Oh
need
my God.
my uterus needs to go back to the right place. But it gave
Wow.
okayness about being sexual. Well, no wonder that
Yeah.
freed them up to be the guilt and shame that they felt. Well, now was being justified. It's
Yeah.
just interesting how our cultural context can and my point of the Freud story is how we can take our cultural context and make it fit, even though it is
Yes.
destructive. And
And
they're not
one of
life
your
light and yeah.
one
Go
of
ahead.
your videos, I think, hit the nail on the head about what this whole general topic is. Because I remember you said something along the lines of what really, or maybe it was a comment on my video, where you're like, I think the major difference between real therapy and conversion therapy is the lack of curiosity. Because if you were to follow the science, you'd be okay to go wherever it takes you. You don't have any preconceived notions. You're willing to be
Absolutely.
wrong. You just are, right? But when you pick and choose the theories you like and the theories you don't like, you're forced to just do this mental gymnastics and create a theory because it fits what you believe rather than listens to your client. And that's what's so dangerous.
That is what's so
And
dangerous.
but I don't even remember what I was, but I do remember the general idea is that with Jeff Robinson, when I was attending courses with him, at first I felt great because the first guy who doesn't stigmatize me finally seems to really get me,
At
and
least
he's
I'm not
teaching
an
me
addict. I may have all these other
exactly.
issues, but at least I'm not that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, finally. But it kind of happened with every therapist. It's like really high and then still not working, right? And then I was frustrated because he seemed to keep talking about walking away from we called it the dragon of homosexuality. And I was frustrated because I'm like, okay, once again, are you not listening to me? Like, I'm going to the temple every week, which you don't even have to do. You have to go once and then you're done. Or when you get married, right? Like, I'm going every week. I'm doing all these extra things. I can't just walk away because in my mind, I had seen what it was like from Evergreen with these men who were devout, doing everything they were told, and their lives were miserable because they were lying. No matter how hard they were trying, they were miserable. And I just knew because I knew that I was weak. I wasn't diagnosed yet with ADHD, but I kind of knew that, like, when I got excited, boom goes my self-control, and suddenly I'm like in it, and then like, oh crap, what did
Impressive.
I just do? You know, because it just takes me over, and then it,
Up, I lost your audio. Oh, there. I think you're back.
oh, is it back?
Yeah, you're back. You paused
Sorry,
there for
my
a second.
alarm went off. Um,
That's okay. I gotcha.
Somehow I just knew that I was going to be weak one day and I was going to do exactly what these men did. I was going to cheat on my wife no matter how much I loved her. I was going to be in the wrong situation at the right time no matter how many times I had guarded myself. Because the same thing happened on my mission. I was absolutely doing everything I had to, but then something out of my control, and then now I'm home early and my life's in shambles. And so I just knew this was going to happen. And so I was angry at this guy. I'm like, why are you talking about walking away from this dragon when I'm telling you I want a bazooka and blow it up? I
Hmm.
can't ever risk this being in my life ever. And then that was, I may have been our last session, because then he leaned in and said, you need to be okay with the fact that this is just like singing the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And he's like, when I say Rudolph the Red-Nosed, what's the first thing you think? And I was like, what? It's like, Rudolph the Red-Nosed what? And I'm like, oh, reindeer. It's like, see, you didn't have to think about it. It's your unconscious. This is inside you. And I can teach you the correct song, which is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Buffalo. You can get married. You can do all these things. You can learn the new song. You can start singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Buffalo, and that's what your normal thing is. But because you know you've sung that song before, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which he's calling the gay lifestyle, some random firing of neurons sometime in your life, that song's going to come up. And you have to recognize that this is just part of your life. You will never be rid of this. And I was livid. Here was the expert of experts admitting to me conversion therapy doesn't work.
Awesome.
And I'm just going to have to walk away from it. And I'm like, that's what I've been doing my whole life. And that's the whole reason I've been doing this for a year and a half. Like, and so here he is admitting that it doesn't work. And it just so happened that around that time, one of my best friends was meeting her pen pal. And she was my best friend because she was the sister of my best friend who was on his mission. And she's like, well, this is nerve wracking because he's a guy, he's gay, but like your conversion therapy is going okay, right? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. She's like, well, just chaperone me, just be so I don't feel alone and weird, right? And so I met this gay guy who was very out, extremely attractive and intelligent, like perfectly my type. Like, and he didn't come on to me or anything, but here I was countering all of my stereotypes. This very intelligent, very masculine, very buff homosexual who was proud of himself, not ashamed. And before I left, he's like, it was great to meet you guys. And he gave me this hug. And I fell apart because this is the first time I had ever experienced what a man love could feel like, to be held in his arms. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm missing. Like, oh my God. And it snapped in my head. I've been singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Mormon my
Mm.
whole life. I was like, oh my God, it's been Rudolph the Red-Nosed Mormon. And it just fell apart. And I was like, look, we have this thing called the atonement. Jesus died for me. And if it's truly the case that it's wrong, then I'll at least know what I'm leaving. But if I don't experience this, it's always going to be this unknown temptation. It'll be alluring because I won't know what it's like. I need to give it a chance. And if it really is wrong, wickedness never was happiness. That's one of our scriptures, right? And so
Mm.
I won't be happy. It won't give me real happiness, but then I'll take that and then I'll be able to marry a woman because I know what I've left. And then I won't cheat on her.
Mm.
But a year after leaving the church, when I was like, all right, let's see what happened. I've been away from a year. I've lived as gay. Suddenly I didn't know what to think anymore because I gave it a try. And when I wasn't brainwashing myself every week, every day, a lot of it didn't make sense. Oh my God, there's so many things in Mormonism that do not make sense. But when you go there every week, of course it does, because you can't think anything else.
And so that moment when he hugged you really was your epiphany.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've been
What a,
singing the Rudolph Red-Nosed Mormon song. That's it.
And so where are you now? What's your life like
Um,
now?
for me, it was really important to be in a relationship with someone who understood how hard it was to leave Mormonism because it was everything for me. It got worse really fast, really bad for years. It was horrible. Um, but I've been with the love of my life for 12 years. He's also a conversion therapy survivor, also a former Mormon. Um, he also plays video games with me, which is my thing. Um, it's in, you know, when I was 15 and first admitted to myself that I was gay, it's because I love spending every moment with my best friend and we would just play video games on the weekends. I wanted that to be my life forever, singing with each other, playing music together, hanging out, enjoying, doing good things, serving each other, serving other people, going to Boy Scouts, like just living the Mormon life with my best friend who I happen to love. And that's I tease him all the time. He's a Boy Scout because he won't break any freaking rule. He's like, we don't jaywalk for a reason. There are rules. I'm like, oh my god, it's no one's here, you know. And so I married a Boy Scout, and that's exactly what I wanted. And so I literally feel like every moment of every day I'm on cloud nine, and I feel like everything else from here is just extra. Because if I were to die tomorrow, I could already say like I'm living more of the dream than I ever thought was possible, and more so than I think most people realize is possible. Because when you have to fight for something, like even the ability to allow yourself to love someone, the value of that love is exponentially more appreciated because I wasn't allowed to consider allowing myself to love someone. And I had to fight tooth and nail to have it.
If we circle back to that whole authenticity versus belonging, what I hear you say is that when you are authentic, your ability to belong is much greater. Right. We live
Yeah.
the lie that we think, okay, we've got to give up in order to belong, but actually
Yes.
it's the other way around. That
Yeah.
our capacity to fully embrace love and unconditional acceptance comes with we love ourselves and then we can feel the love from others. That the
Hmm.
two do dance together, but it
Hmm.
our the brainwashing we get is, well, we've got to give up on this in order to get that. When
Hmm.
really it's when we lean into this, we get that.
100%. As a missionary, the thing that I loved most is that I told myself every morning that I woke up, it is your job every moment of every day to have the love of Jesus in you and share it in every opportunity possible. It was love that drove me. And I find now when I find myself reacting from trauma, shutting myself off, not talking to people, avoiding straight people because they're triggering and just uninteresting. I remind myself, this is a trauma response, Sam. Let's be your higher self. And when I'm my higher myself, I'm kind of who I was as a Mormon. I'm focusing more on the love that I was trying to share as a Mormon, but instead of being forced to show love, I can do it now because I've been there. I know what it's like to be in so much pain that like it hurts just to wake up. And so because I've been there, like I feel like it's easier for me to realize why people do really horrible, painful things because I did that to myself
Hmm.
because I felt like I had to and the environment was driving me to. And if I did all those horrible things to myself because of my environment, maybe I should blame the environment rather than the person suffering and adapting. And so it
Completely, it's create compassion for them. Yep. We lost you there for a second, but you're
sorry,
back.
another
That's
alarm.
okay.
I think I
Yeah.
fixed it.
So
What
let's.
what did you just
I
say? It sounded phenomenal.
oh, I don't remember. That's my ADD. Because I was ready to move on so BMW is my moderator, and has been on my
Oh.
live since the very beginning. Um, so I want to ask BMW, do we have any questions? And I did have a question as well. You mentioned the word mixed orientation marriages. I want to give a chance for someone who We have four questions. So let's get through his questions first, and then we can circle back to that mixed orientation. I can assume what that means, but I think that's an interesting framework.
If you are a survivor of conversion therapy, there's a lot of terms you just know. Um, Same-sex attraction disorder is what they diagnosed us with because you weren't allowed to call yourself gay because that's a liberal conspiracy, right? And so you're suffering
Woke,
from
because remember, I live in the anti-woke state.
exactly. Uh,
It's where
what's
woke comes to
interesting,
die.
it's a game of cat and mouse because before they told us to join mixed orientation marriages. So you would either lie to your wife and say you were straight, or you would do which one of my friends, who's a very famous Mormon who joined a mixed orientation marriage. He's an amazing person. If he ever gets on TikTok, I'll send you his way. He married his wife, letting her know that he's gay, and she was okay. So she was able
Right, right.
to join this marriage with him, knowing that
Eyes wide open.
he loved her, but it was going to be hard to become attracted to her. He eventually did, but only to her, right? And so mixed orientation marriage is just that. That's what the church used to teach us.
Mm,
Now they know that that's not what you're supposed to do. And by then, half the Mormon missionaries
yeah.
were reading their handbook and knowing you're not supposed to encourage this. But it was bishop roulette. Sometimes your bishop would say, this is what you need to do because that's just what people said. And some people would actually read their actual bishop's handbook saying, you need to get married to fix it. And so for me, I wasn't told to do that, but I was also not discouraged from it. And now they're admitting that it doesn't work. They're admitting that finally your actions aren't, being gay is not sinful because your actions are sinful. They're finally separating it because with me they weren't. Because there's this book called The Miracle of Forgiveness where they basically say you're better unalived than gay. Because if you were to not be
Wow.
alive and be chaste, then that's better for you. And it was confusing for me because I was like, well, I'm still gay, but I'm clean. So which is it? Because you're not giving me any line
There's
between
no
my
room
actions and
here.
who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
It was so confusing. But now they're separating it. They're saying your behavior and your orientation are different. But now they call it like context therapy versus instead of like conversion therapy, so they can skirt around it. But they're still teaching the same thing
Shaming.
of like
Yeah.
leaving it behind. So it's the same BS,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
call it differently.
So the first thing that BMW want is that I guess there's been an outpouring of support for your story and the
Thank you.
courage really for you to come forward to be able to share with people who don't who right if you're straight this is not a struggle you can understand right the world is made
Oh,
for straight people
yeah.
so to understand the level of angst and then within the context of the community just the love and support as it relates to that.
Hmm. I would
Mhm.
love to tell that if there's anyone straight, I had this epiphany today of just sitting in what it was like to get that hug, to realize what it was like.
Mm.
It's been hard because I felt like I had told myself I was straight, like it was like being in a room and being told that a lit candle is the sun. Yeah, I could even get burned with it. When I get really close, it gives me warmth, right? And then as I get older, I can be around a campfire and be like, "Yup, this is what it's like. Okay, I'm experiencing this," and thinking that's what life is. But when I was hugged, I was given a glimpse of the sun, and then from then on, nothing the wolves were out. The veil was lifted and I could never see anything the same ever again because suddenly I understood. I knew what the songs were about. I even like bit my fist. I was like, oh, because I was trying not to be attracted to this guy, and it was like, oh my god,
Wow.
is that why straight people bite their fist? And then suddenly like all these things
Everything
made
just lined right
sense.
up. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I never asked myself, Sam, why do you not have wet dreams about girls? I was like, well, because the Lord says don't think about them, and I don't, obvi. You know,
See
like
how good I am?
just
Yeah, it reminds me of my, and I'm ready for the next question, BMW, but it reminds me of my story. And that, so I had an older brother who was gay, and he actually died by suicide, and he had struggled with his sexuality really his entire life. And there were other dynamics there, but that was my model. And it's like, well, I don't want that. there's that's not, and so all those sensations that I had, I just pushed away. And it really wasn't until I met my husband, and saw someone who was a very successful businessman who was very healthy and was loving life. And it's like, oh, that's an option. Like you can be
Hmm.
this and that at the same time. I've never seen that before because I grew up in a conservative, heterogeneous or homogeneous community. It's very white, middle class America.
Hmm.
And frankly, I can't recall of any gay people, or at least any gay leaders in our community, that could have been someone to look up to. And it's like, well, clearly that's not an option. So,
Well, and think about it,
so
because like our examples of gay was Will and Grace, right? Like I remember being like, I'm not just Jack, but then all of my friends would say that I
exactly,
was, you know?
exactly. Yes. That's the stereotype. Like, well, I'm not that.
You know.
So the BMW, the article on aversion therapy, I actually posted, that was the article I did today. I did a TikTok today on that. Um, I actually posted it on there. Yes, Paul Lynde, that's another great example, right? Those were the stereotypes of who gay people were. And it's like, well, I'm not that flamboyant. I mean, I would have to say that I did try to butch it up. I definitely knew that I did that. Like I would see a photograph of myself and I would be like a little, I don't know, whatever the gay stance
Hmm.
is. And I'm like, oh, I got to work on that. Like, I can't be
Hmm.
doing that. Or when I would
Hmm.
get the phone call and someone would say "man" to me, I'm like, no,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
but the article should, I reposted it in the TikTok. So if Destiny wants to, oh, look at that, she has the same last name as I do. If she goes back to that, she should be able to see it. I put it in one of the comments. She can also DM me if she wants to DM me. I can send her the article. I don't. I'm happy to do that as well. So, any other questions here for Sam?
I will say one thing. If there's anyone queer listening, so one of the last things that my conversion therapist said to me is when he realized that he lost me, and I was like, this isn't working. He pulled out this massive book of statistics and studies, which of course, like their test subjects were people in mental hospitals. So of course, clearly not doing well. And then they would use the studies, the research from there to prove why, being gay makes you mentally
Uh,
disturbed, right?
Wait,
But
I,
he,
I I don't know if you know, but there was a landmark study that was done in the 60s. It was the
Mhm.
first real study. You may be aware of this, where it was a woman psychiatrist who studied gay people, and she actually found that gay people not only were healthier, but they were more successful than straight people in general. And that was when they used that particular, because as I'm sure you're aware in the DSM, which is our Bible for
Right.
psychological disorders, up until the DSM-2, being gay was considered a mental disorder. It was her study, as well as the gay psychiatrist in New York. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but the picture of him in the newspaper in New York, he's actually wearing a horse head when he is testifying in front of the DSM committee.
Interesting.
Because yeah, I mean, that's how this was just in the 1970s. I mean, that's not, in my opinion, not that long ago, where he was saying, no, I'm a perfectly healthy person. There's nothing wrong with me.
Hmm.
So the question was, did they have, were there other choices that you were given as far as therapy styles other than the addiction or conversion?
Yes.
So you
But to
mentioned
finish my thought
electroshock
really
was another.
quick,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
electroshock was an option. Just before I lose anyone or lose the thought, in that book that he pulled up, he read me a statistic saying that the success rate of homosexual relationships was 3%. And
Wow.
if if you are single and queer, I would love to encourage you to give a big fu to my conversion therapy and find your partner that proves him wrong. Live your joy, find your love, because look, marriage is 50%, let alone, right? Let alone a group of people who are already discriminated against, fear for our lives depending on where you live, right? Like it's not easy being authentic in many parts of the world. And if you're queer, prove him wrong and help me shove a middle finger in his face by finding the most perfect person in the world and live your joy, because that's the best revenge we'll ever get. So
Love
aversion
it.
therapy
Love
was
it.
one.
I'm going to use that
Um,
clip right there.
several people in Evergreen. Well, I remember my husband talked about this story where he would have rubber bands where he'd have to smack himself every time he had a gay thought. So, be hurting yourself all day. Um, there is a book called um, something along the lines of like, I have a TikTok on it. If you follow my channel, it's one of them. It's like the Latter-day Saints and the queer rights movement or something like that. It goes into very big detail on all the things that they offered to us.
Mm.
The general idea is what they told us to do, at least the majority of my time, was what they called reparative therapy, which I think they're not allowed to say now because people now know reparative therapy is another way for conversion therapy,
Yes, yes.
because they ran off that idea that you're psychologically broken and that's why you became gay. And so if you heal your
Ah,
relationships, if you heal your relationship with your mother, if you heal your relationship with your father, you'll mysteriously become gay. And so become straight. And so for me, the majority of my time was trying to heal my relationship. So I even in my what I call them my trauma journals, because they're my journals during the time. I found out, because I had forgotten about this. One of the ways that I was told to become straight was to go fishing with my biological father, because fishing makes you straight,
who
specifically with your
knew?
father. Oh my God, it was so ridiculous. And so, I mean, the guy's in Mexico, but all right. So I found some way to have someone pay for it. And I was like, you haven't paid for like not life support, when the father pays child
Oh,
support.
child support.
I was like, you haven't paid for child support, so fly me out there just to make up for it, right? So my father was like, great, right? So I go there, meet my biological father, who I don't really know anything about. And I remember before having this affirmation of the spirit in the temple, the most sacred of sacred places, that this was actually going to heal my relationship with my father. The reason I became gay, it's been the hardest thing in my life, the biggest ache psychologically. I'm going to become straight as soon as I meet him and heal this wound, right? Because that's what my therapist was
Everyone
telling
says
me,
yes.
right? And so he was too busy to go fishing with me. But before I left, he somehow knew. He could just tell, even though my mother was shocked. And she was like, "No, what?" She didn't believe it. But like, I wasn't even there for a week, and my biological father was like, I just want you
Dude.
to know. He knew. He's like, I just want you to know, that I love you, and no matter who you are, I don't know if you're gay or not because you're clearly very Mormon, but if you are gay, I love you. Like, I
Wow.
wrote this in my journal that I was so disappointed in him because he was not the righteous man that I needed to teach me how to become a heterosexual. And now I'm
Wow.
so sad. I'm so sad because here was this father authentically loving me, and I'm rejecting his love because the church tells me not to. Because the church
Wow.
tells me he's a heathen. And I'm like, damn, all the things in my life that the church destroyed because I wasn't allowed to authentically have relationships with the people I could have had. So it's so disappointing, but they told
It's
me to repair my relationships.
so Jimbo comments that there's something called halt therapy. It's not something I'm familiar with. What
God,
is?
it's the other
Must be
thing that like
fabulous.
it's so triggering to me because I went to school to become a therapist. Huge mistake because my clinical director is a current Mormon, active Mormon. It's a bishop. I thought it would heal my wound with the Mormon Church where I wouldn't like curse their name. Little did I know the ex-Mormon community on TikTok has been healing that. But he was nothing but triggering.
Hmm.
And the halt method is basically when you exist, you have attractions, and but they call it when you're hungry, angry, lonely. What was
Tired.
T?
Tired.
Tired. Thank you.
Someone comment. Yeah. It's
Which in
not
my
me. It
mind
was
is
someone
like,
on there.
when you're existing as a human, right? You will have these attractions, and so the idea is you're
Oh,
supposed to recognize that when you have these attractions is because you're one of these four things. You're
gotcha.
supposed to stop it, and then they might give you another thing for aversion therapy, or another thing where they would give exposure therapy. That was another thing that Jeff Robinson wanted to do with me, exposure therapy. He basically said I was afraid of women because I had such a domineering mother. that what I needed to do was like treat it like being afraid of snakes because I hate snakes. I just cannot stand them.
Okay.
Right. And so he used that as an example, like, you'll see a snake and be very far away, and then you'll become comfortable with that, and then be closer, closer, closer until you're petting the snake. And in this case, it was petting the kitty, you know? So in this case, I was supposed to slowly become comfortable being around a woman, even though the last time I kissed a woman, I nearly vomited. And so I had to run and run and run until I could not just feel the urge to vomit.
Huh.
Um, and so that was another thing: aversion therapy, halt therapy, what was it? Exposure therapy, reparative therapy, conversion therapy by being a better saint. Obviously, that was not helping me. The majority of the time when I saw conversion therapy, they assumed I was a sex addict. And so they would try to give me things like halt, things like that. And I'm like, girl, I don't even know how to pleasure myself like literally every other Mormon was and just wasn't telling their bishops. I didn't know how you did that because, I just wasn't doing that, because when you hate yourself enough,
Yeah, that's right.
you can find ways to, I
Hate
mean,
yourself.
psychosomatic is a reason, is a thing for a reason, right? Like pain in your body will exist because psychologically you have no other option. And for me, I literally killed my drive whatsoever.
Wow.
And so I just avoided everything by praying more, learning more scriptures, quoting more scriptures, singing more songs, like doing all of that.
So one of the other questions was, uh, do you have any spiritual context now, if you're comfortable
No.
sharing that?
I would say one of the things I love about the group that I'm part of, CT survivors is what we call it, for conversion therapy survivors. CT survivors was actually founded by a lesbian, what's it called when you're um, like in the hospital and you're a religious person? Ah, I deal with them all the time for work. Dang it, chaplain. It was actually founded by a lesbian chaplain, because she knows that Christian nationalists have taken over Christianity, and the only way you can be Christian is by being a bigot. And she's not, obviously not, because she's a Christian and accepts her identity. And so, what I love about the organization is that you can be Christian and you're welcome. We are not going to hate on religion, even though personally, um, a, I mean, and it's also a Mormon thing. When you leave the church, a lot of us become atheist or agnostic because we have such a bad taste in our mouth that it's
Understandable.
just really hard to have any other type of spirituality fill that void. I When I'm pressed because I'm around bigots, I will say that I'm Buddhist, because I did heavily dive into that because it felt the closest thing that I could have without being triggered. And so I have gotten heavily into Buddhism, into meditation, um, also because you can be an atheist and a practicing Buddhist. So that is my personal path. But what I love about being part of ctsurvivors.org is that there's a lot of people in my organization who remind me that you can be a beautiful Christian, a believing Christian, a wonderful human being, and still be gay. And that those two do not have to be antithetical to each other. And I love that they challenge me every time I have my pain, make me want to hate on religion, because you don't have to.
Right. It's, something else you probably don't know about me, but I actually work with quite a few Jehovah Witnesses. And
Oh,
it's very interesting, as a gay man, to work with people. I had a client once say to me that, there were pagans and then there were gay people. It was from an
yeah.
order of scariness. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, I knew, and she actually found out that I was gay, and probably is one of the most. She when she found out, she Googled my name, and my office manager is also my husband, and so she Googled our names, and our wedding page came up.
Oh,
So that's what you get for Googling, right?
yeah.
And so that's how she found out, and so when she came back to me, her first thought was, "I'm not sure I can stay with you because of now, mind you, I've been seeing her off and on for 10 years. So
Wow,
we're
what a
not talking
relationship.
we're not talking yeah, we're not just talking a fly by night relationship." And she's like, "Ultimately, what I thought of is you've always been present for me,
Mm.
So there's no reason for me to believe that your sexuality has anything to do with anything. And the
Yes.
metaphor that she used for me was as well, who knows? My doctor could have had 3 abortions, and I never asked that question.
There you go. Yeah.
So being gay and having 3 abortions, apparently there's a similarity between the two. It just is an interesting thing as it relates to who are we as professionals and how we show up for our clients and right what my if we're the way we are trained as clinicians, right, is we put our values back here and we are
Yes.
present with our clients, and that's
Yes.
and I'm an approved Jehovah Witness therapist. And
Congrats.
and I actually love working with them. I mean, they, whatever reason, I can talk a language in which they can hear me that makes them feel safe. I'm not judgmental.
Yes.
That's their belief. I understand I know a lot about their faith, and so I can speak a lot of that language. And it's interesting how I navigate that. And so it just reminds me of that question of how do you I actually identify as a very spiritual person, despite some of my, I've been disinherited, and a lot of things have happened in my life as it relates to my coming out journey as well. And mind you, I was married to a woman for 26 years. Like
Yeah.
I looked really good on paper, but
Uh-huh.
as my stepmother said, well, I always knew. That was kind of her, like, I always knew you were a little effeminate. I'm like, okay, well, whatever that means. And then she
Yay.
would cast all these other judgments on me as well, which none of which
Yeah.
were true, but that's what we do, right? Are
I
there any
have
other? Oh, go ahead.
I have some wonderful people that I talk with who are ex Jehovah's Witness. One of them is here now, and it's been fascinating to share stories or just watch videos on the parallels between Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism, because they're two very high demand religions, and
Very high demand,
that
yes.
queer XJW says, as a Jehovah's Witness, I can confirm those were definitely the tiers, like pagan, gay, yeah. That's how it was. I definitely admire you because, as a clinician, one thing that I learned, and I'm glad that I'm not practicing now because I think when I'm honest with myself, I think I recognize that being a therapist for anyone who's not queer was too triggering. They just have too many opinions laced in things that, no matter how much I work on myself, I just have to acknowledge the fact that while I'm very happy with who I am, I will never be able to fix every trigger. And just a lot of things can trigger me because, I mean, 2 years of intense programming trying to find every trope there is against gay people. Not only did I live that, but I repeated it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a member of ctsurvivors.org who was an evangelical, what is it, where you do holy rollers type of thing, Pentecostal, yeah, Pentecostal. And one of the things he was told was to cast the demon outside of himself because he was told he had a gay demon. And so, literally, every day for a year, he would have to cast demons outside of himself. So, he was hating himself, saying, I cast you out, like just like an hour of spewing hate against himself. And when he shared this story in the group, I felt like I lived it even though I didn't go through that exact thing. I felt I connected so much with that experience because every single day was trying to find a new way to hate myself. Every single day was trying to find a new thing wrong. That was because what they said is you need to find your root, the root cause of what made you gay. And so you would have to find something, fix it, stop your ballroom dancing, great, stop baking, great, stop loving beaches and quoting beaches, great, just like finding all of these gay roots and healing them. But because obviously it doesn't work, you'd have to keep picking apart parts of your life that were beautiful and gorgeous and gave you compassion and connection, and now destroy them and hate them. And so, of course, I was clinically depressed because that's what they wanted me to do. They were trying to break me and make me into the new heterosexual man. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's such a
but I'm a cheerleader. That's what it is.
well, it's amazing what we do in the eyes of religion and community, and what we think is, and I can get to the place, of course, I do work with a couple of parents whose children have been excommunicated or
Mm,
disfellowshipped.
yeah,
You use the word excommunicated in the Mormon Church. They
yeah.
use disfellowshipped in the witness faith.
Mm,
And as a parent, it is such a struggle, right? Because they're not allowed to have contact. And I'm like,
hmm.
I just,
Yeah,
you know, I've said this to my kids many, many times. There is nothing that you could ever do that will make me not love you. I said, you could be a
yeah,
serial killer. You could be the most prolific serial killer out there. And you know what? I will visit you on death row because there won't be anything that you can do that I don't love you. And it's like, and that is the depth of my love, my unconditional love. And granted, I know I use this term transmit versus transform. And I know in
mm,
my world, right,
hmm,
there was a transmission of their trauma onto me, but the last thing I was going to do was transmit my trauma onto them, and it
hmm.
was going to be unconditional. And I scream it
Yeah.
all the time. I'm very, very conscious of making sure that that is the case. So someone's asking the question about how do you join the support group? This is
Oh,
your commercial time.
yeah. So there are multiple ways to join. You can message me through TikTok. If you go right now to ctsurvivors.org, you can look at our website. There's this contact us option where you can email us. And I've made it so that when you email the website, not only does our email address get it, but it sends a copy to my work email because I live through my work email. So I'll actually read that versus like the email for the group, which occasionally I'll get to because they're like, you deal with it. Here, you have the website now. And I'm like, oh God, it's too much. So yeah, you could message me through TikTok or you can go to ctsurvivors.org and email us. We meet every Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we have Canadians, we have people from the Philippines. I just today found out we have someone who wants to join from India. So they're going to be joining at 6:30 in the morning. That'll be great. Have
Wow.
someone in China,
Commitment.
people who used to come from Australia, someone in South Africa who can't join because it'll be 3 a.m. So hopefully, my biggest goal, the whole reason I did this TikTok is because I was super disappointed that I had to fail as a therapist to find this group,
Mm.
and it's changed my life. Because like as long as I avoided Mormons, like move states away, I was fine. And because I wasn't ever triggered. But as soon as someone says something ignorant or something that would remind me of Mormons, I fall apart and I respond out of triggers and I become someone very much that I don't like because
Hmm.
I'm not me. I'm responding from my triggers, right? And this group has been so incredibly healing because someone can say something and you're like, it is not just me and I'm not crazy. Like, I have been judging myself, like, why can you not get over this? And then someone will say something and you're like, that is literally my life experience. It's different clothes, but it's the same outfit, like, and then just hearing someone say this is real. You're not alone changed everything. Like, I'm not triggered nearly as much. I mean, I had to go back on medication because TikTok is triggering just even talking about it because you have to like reenact my trauma basically in my videos. But before I did TikTok, like, gone from medication just because I felt so healed.
Hmm.
So I wanted to get so big that we have chapters and that I can say, hey, you're in this side of the world chapter, this is when you meet. You're in this side of the world chapter, this is where you can meet. Because people are still unaliving themselves all the time. Every 6 months, the Mormon Church gets together for their worldwide conference. They will say something homophobic, and we lose people from the queer community. So it's not just past. It's still happening.
And so, about how many people attend the group each week?
Now, weekly, we're down to like 4 or 5 consistent people, but it's a good problem to
Really?
have because when I first started joining, we had maybe like 10 or 15 people show up. And I would actually say that I think it's a testament to the group that a lot of
Because
us just
they
feel
graduate.
healed.
Yeah, they.
Yeah, a lot of us just don't need to show up anymore. I would also say that another reason why I want chapters is because I think Unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where there's kind of a certain person that's coming every week. They tend to be very highly successful. They tend to be very much in the education field, doctors, therapists, people who are stereotypically successful in life, right? And so we also can be friends on the side, and so we kind of speak this esoteric language where we just kind of get each other as well. And unfortunately, when you are someone who does not have a support system, who's hugely on the social anxiety, on you just came out of conversion therapy, you are not doing okay, you know, that can feel very intimidating.
Hmm.
And I don't want the place that has been so healing for me to push people away just because we're so small that we almost feel like a clique, you
Right.
know? And and even though I still have contact with all those people who don't show up anymore, and know that they're always welcome, and every now and then they come in and they appear, I would love it to be so consistent, so large that you know you can join this group where not only is it conversion therapy survivors, but it's also ex Jehovah's Witness, conversion therapy survivors, also victims of sexual assault. You know, just like I want those chapters to be there because I know there's enough of us,
I
but
love
we
it.
just don't know it's there. So,
So I wanted to comment on from the trauma lens because it's part of what I want to accomplish in these interviews is that your statement about triggers and how there for a while you were doing really well, that when you leaned into
oh
the
yeah,
triggers, you were no longer activated. And then and I think this is really important who are people in their healing journey is that is how triggers work. They come in and they come out. And as long as we remember that avoidance is one of the primary aspects of PTSD, and that we intentionally lean in when we are prepared and have the resources to be able to do it, right? We have to do it with our eyes wide open. That's when we're able to navigate those triggers effectively, so that we get to the point where they now the triggers will always exist. The key is that they don't exist to the point where we're highly anxious and activated fight, flight, or freeze response,
yes,
or that we avoid it, like, oh, I'm not going to that movie,
yes,
and that we can get to that space, that's possible, even when we get
yes,
reactivated again, and we
yes,
may even avoid for a
yes,
while, but we can, when we have the resources again, we can lean back in. That healing
yes.
can occur, even though it does not go to zero. Healing can absolutely occur.
And that's why it was not appropriate for me to try to heal my triggers by going to grad school where my clinical director was Mormon. The place
Not
to
yes, yes,
heal
yes.
is where you can go to a group like CT Survivors where it is triggering because we're talking about stuff that we even forgot. And now suddenly you remember, you're reliving everything. But the whole environment says, we get it. You're valued. You are safe here. Then you heal because you relive it, but you're literally rewriting those neurons. Thank you, Jeff Robinson, for teaching me about cognitive psychology. And then I got a degree in it where now I can understand, yeah, those neurons will randomly fire, but we're now retraining them to relive your memory without the trauma, without that pain, because now you can just look at it and say, yeah, that happened, but you know what? I'm not alone and I'm not broken.
And and I think recognizing that we have agency is such an important thing. So I've been in three PhD programs. So I was in a traditional PhD program, hated it. It was way too political for me. So that was at the state university system. And then because of the work that I do with sexual abuse trauma survivors, I wanted to get my PhD in sexology. So I found a sexology PhD program. But the premise of the program was addiction. Everything was sex addiction,
Mm-hmm.
which is so counter to my stance.
Yeah.
And this is why
Yes.
agency matters. Like, no, I do want to get my PhD in this. I know this is going to help the men that I work with. And so the program I landed was the Modern Sex Therapy Institute.
Mm.
Where I'm getting, and they are very sex positive and really
Good.
operate from the sex, or from the curious lens, which for me is how I operate in life, right? The whole key to life is to be curious, in my opinion. And that is how we heal. That when we can try to be as open-minded as possible, and that's how they taught the program. And I learned so much from that program. It was one of the best decisions that I made. But it was the choice of no, no, and then finally yes. And to know that I had the choice to be able to do that.
I have a question for you because I feel so bad. If you're in my channel, I apologize. I have not until now noticed the questions. Um, so
Yes,
please,
please.
if you have questions, redo them now that I'm actually able to watch. I have a question that I would love to bounce off to you first because this is a question that I have all the time and it's an evolving thought process for me. But the question is, do you think people know that conversion therapy doesn't work, but they use it to make people on the spectrum leave faith? And to me, I understand that question to mean
Wow.
like basically, do you think they know what they're doing? And then if they do, why are they still doing this? And I think I have an idea, but I would love, because I mean, you've been in practice way longer than me. So, because like I was a therapist for
Yeah,
6 months and then booted. So,
I think I'm on year 33.
ooh,
Um, I think that people's faith is and that's how much I love mental health. I mean, and that actually is why I actually started and ran a children's mental health organization for 25 years. Grew it
wow, love
from
that.
I started off with 4 employees, and when I left, we had 120 employees,
Oh
$6 million
my
budget. We served almost 2,000 kids a year. It was kind of the cream of the crop. But there was so much going on in my life, and really it all became about raising money, and I was losing the work. Plus, I was coming out and all of that other stuff that was
God.
happening
A
in my
lot.
life. But
Yeah.
I love mental health, and a lot of it I will give, and this is the gift in the wound that I talk about is my journey with my brother. Growing, he was only
Mm,
15 months older than I was, and so being in his space of sadness all the time made me a person of resilience, of
mm,
hope, of
mm.
of how in the world are we going to conquer it. Now, I didn't succeed, and of course, I do know now as an adult, I can't make him happy. I knew I couldn't do that, but boy, I did my damnedest as a kid. And I'm like, well, if I learned this skill, I might as well do it for a living. And so I love what I do. But I think that there is such a depth of faith as it relates to that they want to be healed. And I think there are people out there who so believe in conversion, they desperately want that to work.
Yeah.
And well, I heard so and so, and what
Yeah.
about that? And that's what they hold on to, those nuggets, because they do believe that they're going to hell or limbo
Hmm.
or whatever. They won't be here in the new system. That's what they call it in the witness phase. Is we're all waiting for the new system, and
Interesting.
and I love religion. I mean, I'm fascinated by religion. I was, and I'll just give you because I always try to, like, okay, how does this work? And so I'm learning about Spain since I'm going there now. And so Spain did not become a country until Isabel and Ferdinand married, right? It was a marriage of power where there were five different regions of Spain, and when they came together, that's when it became Spain. So for almost 1,000 years, it was occupied by the Moors. So it was a
Yes.
Muslim faith. And guess what? She was Catholic. Who's the one who had the money, by the way? That's why it's always Isabel. And so that's where the oh, now the word is escaping me, where they basically beat people to become Catholics. Um,
Oh,
the
spare the
the
rod, spoil the
movement.
child.
No, it was not the execution, but surely someone can help me out here.
Oh God. Um,
Inquisition. The whole reason why the Inquisition occurred was to unify. It was about power, right? We're all in this together,
hmm.
right? Those Muslims are bad, we're good. And so it's all about power. And when you're brainwashed to believe that, well, then there's got to
Right.
be it. And of course, our power isn't necessarily in that dynamic,
Yeah.
but I operate from the worldview of there's a function behind all behavior. There's a reason why we do what we
Yes.
do. Now,
Yes.
I also believe in temperament. I do a whole metaphor on the dandelion and the orchid, and I talk about my brother, for instance, right? We grew up in the same household. We're freaking a year apart, right? So there's not that much difference as far as what we experience, yet we were 180-degree difference temperament. And the story I tell is so my parents divorced when I was very young. My mother remarried when we were 6, and their worldview is we all needed to look, like the perfect little family. So we changed our name. Now, my biological father would not allow us to be adopted, but
Oh.
somehow the situation was manipulated that our last name was changed. So I remember having this family meeting where the announcement of the name change, and as we left, my brother broke down into tears, and I'm thinking,
Mm,
this is kick ass. Like, how many people get to have four names? And like, I get to do something to be part of something, right? His whole thing was, what, I'm not good enough? Like, I,
mm,
as a human being, can't just be me to be part of this family. I have to be something else.
yeah.
So, exactly the same phenomenon, but from a temperament perspective, he saw it one way and I saw it another. So, I know temperament matters as it relates to it, but experience matters too.
Mm,
And all of that, the
yeah.
blending of all of those things results in why some people, when we think of the gay community in particular, you have highly functional, or actually the data is out there that most gay men are what we call performers. That the way that they get their love is performance-based love. So they become high levels of executives. They make lots of money. They are super, when you go to Washington, D.C., a lot of those people that work there, they're gay because they work, they're going to prove their
Yeah.
worthiness through that. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
read the book Velvet Rage, but that's an
Yes.
aspect that he talks about in that book. And yet
Yeah.
we have a part of our community that are lost in addiction,
Hmm.
that are intentionally got HIV,
Yeah.
which is part of my brother's, was one of my brother's situation. It was intentional on his part,
Yes.
um, because he didn't feel like he was worthy. So let me do something to be self-destructive. Same community, same behavior, two distinctly different responses.
Yeah.
And my thing is, let's be curious about that. Like, what's going on? Let's figure out. I started talking about the schizophrenia, and knowing that 50% of the population, there's something going on, that 50% of the time one twin gets it and the other. So something's
Right.
happening. Let's be
Yes.
curious about what that is, as opposed to in the Freudian days, we had the schizophrenic mother, which is the control. That's what caused schizophrenia.
Right.
That it was a
Right.
personality issue,
Double
not.
bind.
Yes,
Yeah.
the double, exactly. And yet, and
Yeah.
so it's just, we just need to get better at, and I think that's why people still prescribe the whole conversion therapy. It's like, well, but if you want to be in the new system, if you want to make it to heaven, if you want whatever it is that they're selling at the end of the faith paradigm, then let's do it. Except that it kills
Thank
people.
you for thank you for talking about the Inquisition, because I feel, because I'm always of two minds, because I know exactly what it was like to be so desperate that I had to go to conversion therapy, and that Mormonism was everything to me. And so
Yeah.
I know exactly what it was like to not just need conversion therapy, but want it,
Yes.
right? And so it's so frustrating to know that it's still happening and to want to help, but clearly knowing that if I could go back in time, I wouldn't be able to convince myself to stop going. I had to learn for myself how destructive it was, how I had to prove to myself that, like, I was literally, there was this thing that they
It
told
makes me
us in
happy to
conversion
hear you say
therapy.
that.
They told us that you have to be on your knees begging the Lord so much that your knuckles are bloody from banging on the door of Jesus. They
Wow.
literally said you have to give it everything. And unfortunately, I was so in it that I think until I did do things like that, I wasn't able to let go. And then suddenly I get that hug and boom, just like, and the everything fell into place from there on. Someone mentioned something. Uh, I've lost my thought, but there was another thing that, oh, the double bind. Someone in my conversion therapy group had talked a lot about the double bind. Unfortunately, that was a trigger for him because his conversion therapist, who was actually very common for a lot of us, um, his theory was that the double bind is why you're gay, and
Mm.
that you need to have, oh, I forget the terminology, but like a double loop. Oh yeah, a double loop to undo they love creating theories. They love theories. A double loop to undo the double bind, and then you won't be gay anymore. But then it's so frustrating because then you can have these people who there is someone in my group who used to bring people into conversion therapy and teach conversion therapy, and then later realize it's like, I can't keep lying to myself, it's a sham. but like it's because we have to prove to ourselves I've tried enough, right?
Yeah.
And so it's so frustrating to want to criminalize it. And I'm glad that the organizations do. You can't have a license if you're going to actually propel this. But state by state, religious laws win, right? And so I almost feel like I can't support freedom of speech and help people because I also know that like no matter what we do, they keep changing the game,
They
and
draw
they
the
will
line.
always just go underneath they will go to their back rooms, and no matter what we do, because they create a problem and make people desperate, there will always be conversion therapy as long as there's homophobia. So it's frustrating to want to kill it, but no,
Well, it makes me
I can't.
it makes me think about the data that, and you probably know this, that kids under the age of 18, gay kids under the age of 18 die by suicide at 6 times the rate that straight kids do. Right? So it's a huge number. So for me, when I hear that data, okay, so what are we doing wrong that makes kids feel like they need to choose death over being gay?
Yeah.
But someone else could spin the thing. See, gay kids are sick,
Yes.
right? There's something wrong with gay kids. That's why they're killing themselves. And it's like,
It's
except
in
the
the
thing is,
comments.
if you ever talk to a gay kid, if you actually are curious about what their angst is, which is why I so appreciate you talking about your journey and really all the effort, because people really need to understand your story.
Mm-hmm.
And right, you didn't half-ass it. You looked, not only did you look, you did everything that you were supposed to do, and yet you're still gay.
And
So it's not that you
that's
did anything wrong.
it's
You
why
did.
I'm frustrated because I can't bring the data to people and say, this is why you need to stop. I think I had like a 3 hour conversation via text with this teenager in England, trying to beg her not to go to conversion therapy. She was trying to ask questions to be like, okay, so it's bad, but does it work? Things like that. And I was like, what's going on here? And it took me hours for her to convince her she shouldn't go. And what finally got her, because you can't tell her studies because it's not an intellectual problem.
It
It's a
is not
coercion
mental.
problem.
Right.
It's a problem of control by the church. And she finally was convinced when I was like, my own therapist admitted it didn't work, and he was the expert of experts, right? That's when she's like, oh shoot. And I was like, yeah. So do you need like a queer affirming pastor? Because my organization has like 5 of them. Because God, when you're a queer who's religious, you either become a therapist or a pastor. Because clearly that's what happens. Because that's what a lot of people in my group are. And so I sent her references, but I think the problem is like the intellectual side is important because you need to have counter arguments because conversion therapy tells you a lot of things like that, like, oh, look how dangerous it is to be gay. They unalive themselves all the time. And I'm like, you're no, that's not why we do it. We do it because the other way around,
Right. Right.
and so
And
you
that's why I
need
say
someone
if you actually talk
intellectual,
to a kid, if you actually talk to them,
right?
you'll know, right? But they
But it's a
don't.
faith problem, not a intellectual problem. You can't
Right.
intellectualize someone out of conversion therapy.
Correct. So I've taken up 90 minutes of your time. So I so appreciate everything that you shared today. And I know that my audience here is very much appreciative of what you shared as well. I think I shared with you, I will download this and probably put a
Oh yeah,
couple of clips together as TikToks do once I figure that out, because I haven't figured it out yet. I'm
good
not the
luck.
most techie person in the world. I know enough to get myself in trouble. But I so appreciate your time and your vulnerability to be able to share your story. And I applaud your organization.
Thank you.
I hope I never have to send anyone there because they never went to conversion therapy in the first place. That would be more of my wish, but I am glad that you exist because I know it does exist. And
Yeah.
people need to know that they can be loved.
And I need to send you one of my videos to get your opinion because it is my opinion. If you're queer, you've experienced conversion therapy because our community is good
Yeah.
about taking apart binaries, right? Yes, binary speakingly, I went to conversion therapy and you did not. But if you take binaries, break them apart, it's a scale. I really think it's an intensity level of conversion therapy because if you're queer, you've experienced homophobia. Homophobia is what conversion therapy is. That's
Hmm.
really all that it is.
I would agree with you. I mean that I would love
Yes.
to see the video, but it's an
I'll
interesting
send it.
perspective because basically I was not thinking that basically society is conversion therapy.
Well, someone
And
in the comments was like, the Inquisition sounds like conversion therapy. And I wanted to be like,
he
because it
was.
is.
Yeah. I distinctly remember this is probably the aha moment for me. I was in eighth grade, and I remember my holding my books like this, so when you're walking down the hallway, and a kid came up to me. No, I don't even, someone I didn't even know. And he's like, you can't hold your books like that. People will think you're gay if you hold your books like
Uh,
that. And to this
yeah,
day,
shut up.
if I have an urge to hold it like that, I will move it down like that. And
Oh my
his
God.
voice is in my head. But that was that
Yeah.
moment of like, oh my God, they know.
And that's why with the 3%, 3% of gay people only have successful marriages, or like how the church says like you can't have coffee. Well, guess what? Successful marriage in your face. I drink coffee every
I'm
day
going to do a
in your
TikTok on that.
face.
Well, I'm going to do a TikTok on that because I know there's some data out there about successful marriages. So I think his data is wrong, and
It is.
I can find some studies that will counter that. That's not. I'm not talking about marriage. I'm talking about relationships, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference between a legal marriage and being in a relationship. Those are two very
Yeah.
different things.
And
So
sorry, I gotta let you go, but let's be honest, queer people can teach a few things to straight relationships. You can learn a few things from us about what it means to like not be so rigid about trust or monogamy or these
well, it's
crazy things that
interesting because I have to say, just on that note, so in this modern sex therapy program, probably 90% of the people in the program were straight. And
oh,
I cannot tell you the number of people who talked about consensual non-monogamy in the straight community. So here I
really?
am. Now I live in Wilton.
Oh.
I don't know if you know Wilton Manors, but it's like the gayest place in the world. I mean, literally, probably every one of the city commissioners are gay. Probably 50% of the town is gay. I mean, that it is gay as gay can be. And so you get into this little bubble of what you think consensual
Yeah.
monogamy is all about. And then I go to this
Yes.
program, and there are people from all over the country, and they talk about the pineapple, which is, that's in the lifestyle. There's a
Oh.
whole language out
Oh
there,
my
and
God.
dungeons, and instead of bathhouses, they have dungeons. It is rampant in the straight community. And Esther Perel, I don't
Wow.
know if you know who she is,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
her whole thing is
yes.
about non-traditional marriages, and so
Oh.
it is not a it's not a gay phenomenon, right? The heteronormative thing that I hear in the gay, no, it's like no, actually they're rewriting the script as well.
Okay.
Marriage is being written. We're living until we're freaking 80 something now. Like that's a long ass
True.
time. Like what are we doing about that? So
I'm
that's a
still
whole
gonna
nother
tell
topic.
myself though. I'm still gonna tell myself that we created it. You're welcome to have it, straight people. You are welcome.
Well, and there may be some truth to that too, but it's interesting as far it opened my eyes when I went to this program and the language that they had because I'm like, especially when I came from this other one where it was addiction, everything was addiction, and
Mm,
it was a polar, and I'm like, oh, and like I said, this other program really came from a place of curiosity. So again, I can chat forever, but thank you so much,
same.
Sam. Yes, very
So
much.
this is our official sign off on the group, and so I,
Oh,
I figured we had
that's how
to.
you end.
That's yeah. When someone does that, we know they're gonna tap out, and then usually people are like, "All right, it's been 2 hours, we gotta go." So,
Well, and those of you that stuck with us, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. I'm getting a lot of these as well. Just so you know, that's my favorite icon when people come
oh,
on. I do a show every morning, almost most morning on dream interpretation. That's kind of
oh
my
yeah,
little kitschy
I've
thing.
seen that.
And that's the symbol that people do.
Oh, I love
Lots of
it.
people are doing that. So so thank
Good.
you again. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on. It's been an honor.
Good night. And good night to everyone else.